Awesome. So, hey everyone, and welcome. As Erin said, my name's Marcella. I'm also known as Awkward Game Dev. I'm part of Team Meta, and I've been doing a lot of mobile performance passes on several projects. So I've run into a few things that I want to pass on and some best practices. Um, it's pretty dense. And so Aaron's gonna definitely provide a copy of this slideshow, just because there's a lot to go over and a lot to think about when it comes to optimization. Um, so, general thoughts on optimization. Oh, and Aaron, if you could share the link to this so that if they want to go through it as well, like on their own, I don't know how well it's going across on the stream. Um,
Okay,
but
I'll post it right now.
general thought. Oh, thank you. General thoughts on optimization. Basically, not all games are built alike, so they're all going to have different resources that they're using depending on what they're trying to do, and that's going to mean that the solutions that you try to provide to optimize it are going to be different. So unfortunately, we can't just say like, "Hey, this is how to optimize" as a blanket statement. Um, One of the things that you're going to want to do when you have the ability to do it is testing on your mobile device. You can privately publish, and that can at least give you a much better idea of what's going on. Um, and a lot of the calculations are happening in screen space. So screen space is going to be something that I talk about a lot as well. Um, Screen space is basically everything that the player can see on their screen at once. Um, so, for example, if you allow them to like zoom out completely and see the whole world, well, they now have to their device now has to render all of those objects, all of the VFX, anything that's not being culled. Basically, it's gonna render all of those things. Um, and that's gonna make your device sad. Um, and so basically, this is where like mesh relevance is very much your friend. And um, I also call that like mesh culling, but basically on any object, you'll see relevance. If it's set to critical, that means they'll always be able to see it. But if a player is like really zoomed out, let's say they're like on top of a hill, and this I talk about with design. Um, Basically, if you design with performance in mind, um, if you're going to allow the player to see the whole map like that, like let's say they're up on a hill, you have a beautiful vista that you want to like showcase for them. Um, you only want to keep the necessary shapes, and you want to mesh cull the rest. They don't need to see the details on, on a lamp or something like that if they're going to be that far away. They just need those general shapes, and that'll reduce rendering so that not every little detail is being shown to them. Um, and so, as you're building games, those are things that you can keep in mind. Also, if you have a costly, complex scene or area, try to break it up with simple areas so that the device has time to cool down between them. So, temperature is another thing that I'll be talking about. Um, Basically, it's not that you can't have complex areas, it's just that you have to balance them out so that the phone has enough time to cool in between. Let's say a lot of maybe there was like, I don't know, some actiony whatever, like maybe there's a round where there's just a lot of action going on. If they go back to the lobby instead of it being a continuous round, that gives time to just kind of like for the phone to like calm down because there's not really going to be that many crazy VFX or things going on. Hold on a second. I have a toddler asking me for something.
The classic parent mode. Yeah, no, the relevance is super key. I haven't really played with it a lot yet, but I can see how that could definitely be useful for phones.
Okay. Okay, I'm back. Um, so so yeah. Basically, if you can design with this stuff in mind, like that's great. Obviously, a lot of you all already have games out there. So you know, how do you like retroactively make it, ready for mobile? Um, the basically the first steps are going to be non-destructive optimization. Um, that's basically you don't want to just go in and delete a bunch of your hard work or, you want to um, do the most that you can that players won't even realize. So it almost, I don't want to say it's like a thankless job, but it's very much it's a lot of work and it's hidden, but it's gonna make things run, and that's the important part. And so the first thing you want to go through is you want to delete anything that isn't being used in your project content. Um, Everything that's in your project content, even if you're not using it, will go into memory. It'll pull it up on mobile. And that if it's not being used, like it's it's an easy win, basically. It's tedious to go through um, all of your project content because maybe you threw in a bunch of stuff that you were testing out and so that can get pretty cluttered. But basically, if you just right click, go to Open Reference Viewer, it'll show you if there's any references. And if there's not, then you can go ahead and delete it. Another method is to just press delete and it'll delete if it's not being used by anything else. The only time I would say to be careful is if you have direct references to MUIDs, then it's going to say that there's not a reference. And then if you delete it and there was a direct reference by the MUID, then that can cause a problem, but only you would know that on your project. So um, let's see. It's good to go through templates and also materials. But if you had to only have time to do one, it would be templates. Templates cost more in memory than unused materials. So um, as I say here, there's nothing glamorous about this step, but it's super crucial. It'll give you a lot of memory back. In some projects, I would try to test them on mobile and they wouldn't even open, like they'd instantly crash. But the second I cleared out what wasn't being used in project content, it would open. It may not last for very long because it needed more optimization, but that's how crucial this step is. It can help out a lot. You also want to look for hidden objects. Sometimes you'll make a tile set and you'll overlap them and some assets will be hidden inside of other assets. And even if they're completely hidden, there's going to be a memory cost because it's still getting pulled into the game that it exists there. There won't maybe be a GPU cost or because you won't actually see the triangles. But even if there was like a slight pixel showing, you incur the whole GPU cost and the whole rendering cost for the whole asset. So I've seen some cases where there's a very complex, heavy triangle count, high draw call count object that's barely peeking out because it was just the easiest thing to copy and paste to cover, let's say, a hole or something. That's a super expensive object to use to cover up a hole just because it was like simple to do at the time. So replacing that with a simple object because that's all that's being seen anyway is definitely recommended. Okay, detail relevance feature. Welcome to your new best friend. This is super, super powerful. I was under the impression that it was on prod according to the patch notes, but I'm not seeing it in there. So it should be coming out soon. I'm not sure what happened, but this is basically what it's going to look like. Under a client context, you're going to have detail relevance, and it's going to have a minimum detail level and a maximum detail level. Basically, anything low to ultra means it'll show up for all devices. If you do a max detail level of low, that means it's only for mobile devices, because mobile devices are going to be forced to just low, a low video setting. And so a good use case for that is something like these grapes, where you can have a more complex visual for PC, and that would be a medium setting to ultra. And then you can have a less complex asset or just mobile to show up, and that's with low and low. When you put something or things in detail relevance, it's not free. Like it still goes into memory, but it's like a third of its original cost. So it really, really is super beneficial. And that way you can keep your PC version of your game looking fabulous. It does not work in a mesh merge. So if you have a mesh merge, you'll want to take it out, just by the nature of how mesh merges work. Let's see.
I am seeing it in prod. Um,
You do see it in prod?
yeah, the detail relevance, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
It's under the advanced setting, so as long as you have that.
That's why.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I was like, oh, poor Roland. I've been bugging him since last night. I'm like, hey, isn't it supposed to be in there? That's so funny. And I didn't have it checked. Okay. Well, I'm so glad it's in there so you can see it and work with it. Yeah, yesterday I was raising alarm bells and I was like, where is it? Okay, cool. Okay, quick how to diagnose, how to fix. One of the reasons why I want you all to have this slideshow, or these slides, is basically because you're going to refer back to this. If this isn't stuff that you already know, it's like this is a good cheat sheet of like, okay, if my game thread is too high, what should I be looking at? If my GPU is too high, what should I be looking at? Render thread too high and memory too high. Memory being something, and this is like generally good for PC as well, but memory being something that you need to be aware of now for mobile. Um, and so, and let me see, we're doing good on time. So basically, game thread is going to have to do with things with scripts. So things with like animations are run by scripts as well, and so that a good way to base. I think I go over this later too, but yeah, animations. If you lower their transform calls or place them in a medium context, that's how you can fix that. If your animations are too expensive. Physics collision. So wherever possible, try to use simple collision. I believe Slinkus went over that in her presentation earlier this week, on just the triangles on collision. And then if you're spawning things, that also incurs a cost. Usually that's just like a one-time cost because you're spawning it in, but obviously if you're spawning things in and out a lot, that can make game thread go too high. For the GPU, you're going to be looking at object count, which is to also say triangle count. You'll want to reduce those if GPU is too high. Transparencies and some materials can be expensive. So if you stack transparencies, all of those calculations will end up being expensive. And there's some materials, like I want to say like some terrain materials, that if you have them taking up a lot of the screen, they can also be expensive. Most cases, that just doesn't really happen. Even if you like run into a wall and it's just the material taking up the space, it's just the material then, like, so it's not a super huge deal. It's just something to be aware of. Lighting, you want to disable cast shadows whenever possible. Um, and then decals and VFX, if you reduce the density of both, like, decals and VFX having a specific, option to reduce density, um, that can also help your GPU performance. Um, Render thread, if that's too high, you're going to be looking at draw calls. Basically, draw calls can just easily stack up. Um, every object is going to have a base pass. And if you have a light that's casting shadows, it's going to have a shadow pass. And then if you have, let's say, two lights on an object that are both casting shadows on that object, it's going to have multiple shadow passes. Let's say on one of the material slots, you made it transparent. Now it has a transparency pass. Let's say it also has 3 material slots. Well, guess what? Now each material slot is also a draw call. That's one object. So you can imagine how this can kind of blow up without realizing that it's gonna, blow up. Um, and so you just want to be aware of draw calls and reduce them wherever you can. If something doesn't need to be casting shadows, like details on an object, right? Um, if every single detail doesn't have to be casting a shadow, then you can just disable casting shadows on them, um, and that'll help. If you don't need an object that has all of those material slots, because really a simple object might do the trick, then go with the simple object. Um, Render thread is also affected by object count and triangle count and screen space. Um, Basically, when your device is looking at something, right, it renders all of that all at once. So obviously, the less things you have in that space, the less it has to render. This is a good case for lowering the mesh relevance, so that if something's, let's say, far away, then you don't have to render that. Um, Everything uses dynamic shadows, so you basically, again, want to disable casting shadows on assets whenever possible. Anything that has a constant update or redraw, so stuff like World Space UI, camera captures, animations, those have to keep updating or rendering in the case for, like, let's say, camera captures. Those are just a constant, like, updating of a render. And so those can be pretty expensive to the render thread. Um, those are things that maybe you also just want to tuck away. It doesn't mean you have to delete them or get rid of them or not use them. It just means that you have to tuck these things away in like a medium context, so that it still works on PC, but on mobile it won't overheat the phone or add too much, memory. So if your memory is too high, like I said earlier, deleting unused project content assets, mesh merges, remove any unnecessary mesh merges. I will go over mesh merges later as well. I have a complex relationship with mesh merges. It's kind of like a love-hate relationship, so we will go over that later. Unique assets. So basically decreasing the amount of unique assets that you have will decrease memory. The initial cost of an asset is much more expensive than, let's say, that asset plus 100 of them. The additional 99 are not as expensive as that first one. So if you're only using, let's say, one asset in a barely noticeable place, either replace it with another asset that you already have in the scene, or just delete it if it's not that noticeable. And that'll help bring memory down significantly. Um, and object count. So as I said earlier, using detail relevance to tuck away any details for PC only. Okay, so how to diagnose in editor tools. Um, for game thread and render thread, the way that I go about this is basically in profiler settings. There's a, well, and hold on. Should I pause and see if there's, because I know this is a lot of info.
Yeah, there's currently no questions, but if you do have any, feel free to post an Academy text. So yeah, feel free to continue.
Yeah. And I'll definitely open it up for questions at the end as well, as time allows. So, um, but basically, in editor tools, game thread, render thread, you go to the profiler settings, you check these two. This first one's going to be game thread, second one's going to be render thread. If you hover over the flickering numbers, it'll give you more details of what exactly is going on. So in this case, the sunlight, it's the shadows that's causing the render thread to tick. Um, I would I don't really listen to the colors because sometimes they seem irrelevant to me. And so I wouldn't necessarily look at red and go like, oh my gosh, that needs to change or get fixed. It's not necessarily indicative of a problem. It might be, but not always. In the case of the sunlight, if I were to uncheck casting shadows or disable casting shadows, that render thread will go all the way down. So basically, I suggest that you fly around your scene and see where this seems pretty heavy. See what's going on in your map, and what you can maybe do about it and how you can maybe help it. Um, it's based off of screen space, and so as you run around, these numbers will change depending on what you can see in your viewer. Um, and so a lot of the time you'll want to maybe zoom out of your scene, so that you can make sure that you're looking at as many things as possible to kind of narrow down where the problems are. Um, there are some calculations that only show up during preview because they're like during runtime. So animations are a good example of that. It'll only animate while you're in there. So you definitely want to do this at runtime as well, to see what costs there may be for certain, certain calculations. Just a general VFX tip that I mentioned earlier is lowering the density helps reduce game thread and render thread, because it's not having to spawn all of those particles. And I've noticed there's just times where if you lower the density, it actually doesn't look that different, and yet the performance is like much better. So it's always a good thing to kind of test and see where you can do that.
We do have one question. So, as MIP is asking about detail relevance, is there an option for it to use the distance relative to the player, or is it determined by the platform's high and low settings? So how does detail
Um,
relevance actually like work, I guess, is what he's asking.
okay. So detail detail relevance is basically what's going to render or not render. It has nothing to do with the distance of the player. That would be the relevance for the mesh. So here, let me bring this up. So each mesh now has relevance, and that basically is going to determine like how far the player is, and whether it'll be there. So if I make this hand go to low, as I go out, it'll pop out. Whereas before it just wouldn't, or if it's set to critical, it'll always be there. It doesn't matter. I can be this far away. It'll always be there. Um, the the detail relevance has nothing to do with the distance, and that is just a different feature where if if I were to set, let me see, what do I have in here? I'll put you in there. So if I have low and low, because my video settings are at, I think, ultra on here, it's now gone. I don't see it. And that's to be expected. So um, that means that when I publish this game and someone loads in, whatever's in here in this client context that's set to low, max detail setting, that will not render in for them. That will not get pulled in. And it will not incur its original memory cost as if it were in there. So if you were to just like hide it, like hide visibility on it, that would be much more expensive because it's still putting in the whole object in memory. This is not bringing it in at all. And then, vice versa, if I were to put this in oh, that's right, in a medium to ultra and change my settings to low to mimic what mobile would do, now it's gone. And so basically that means now a mobile player will come in and that won't render for them at all, does not exist for them. And you get to now have something that exists on PC that maybe is more complex, and mobile maybe won't even notice because the screen is smaller, So, but yeah, basically two different features.
And there was another question, but I think it got answered. It was about the grapes example you brought up. So would there be two client contexts then, and different detail relevance for each client context?
Yep. And so organizationally, some of the things that we've been doing is maybe labeling, like a client talk context for, desktop and another one for mobile, so that you can immediately tell what's what. But yeah, you would just have two different ones.
Okay, great. I think we're all caught up.
Well, awesome. Okay. How to diagnose triangles and draw calls. So basically the same thing with profiler setting, except you check triangles and draw calls. The first one is going to be triangles. The second one's going to be draw calls. And if you hover over it, like last time, it'll show you, like here you'll see the base pass, which is 4 for the mecha hand. And that's because it also has 4 material slots. And then there's a shadow, pass. But it'll give you details if you hover over it. And that'll let you know in your screen space. So again, it's something to consider that it's only showing you what you can see and what you can see from that distance. The objects have their own LODs, level of details. And so as you zoom out, it'll actually have less triangles than if you were right next to the object. So it's something to consider that if you have a large object with a lot of triangles, if you make it huge, it's going to be rendering all of those triangles because everyone's right next to it, right? It's not going to LOD at all. But yeah, so I suggest you fly around your scene and see where there are, expensive assets that maybe you can trade out for something different. Um, um, maybe the large cylinder doesn't have to be the large cylinder, like maybe it can be the regular cylinder scaled up. Let's see. Oh, and then something to note is if you have something highlighted or selected, it's going to add to your triangle count because it's also calculating the little outline. So that'll give you like a false number here. So you want to, as best practices, to not have anything highlighted so that you get a more accurate picture of what's there. Let's see. But yeah, this pretty much goes over all of that. If you were to disable, casting shadows, you'll see the shadow pass goes down on that object. So either if you have a light that's casting shadows, disabling that if you don't need it will help. But if you just want to go object by object as well, that's another way for it to not cast shadows. Um, in some cases, you have a large version. So here we have the wedge corner complex large, um, and you have the regular one. In some cases, the collision is very different. And so if you were to replace, if you had a big one of these and you replace it with a smaller one, the player where they could go in this little alcove before now can't, and that may cause a problem. So it's just something to be aware of, that you want to double check your collisions. It doesn't mean that you can't trade it off. It just means that maybe you have to make your own collision. So maybe you stick with the large one because you like its nice shape, but you make its own collision that's much simpler. Um, so um, yeah, those are different options for that. In-game profiler. So basically, if you jump into preview mode and press F4, it'll give you the profiler. It gives you a lot of information. I would say it's not as, I don't use this as much as just the in editor, like zooming around the map and seeing what's happening, or in preview in here. But it does give you general stats that will be very important in mobile. And so this is what that's going to look like here in mobile, is the lower screenshot. Um, and this I use all the time, and it's particularly to get the stats. It What you see in editor on PC, because this is device based, um, this isn't going to be accurate for what's going to happen in mobile. So that's why earlier I was like, okay, you have to test it. Like at some point, you're just going to have to go in and test it and see where it's at. You can do preventative work. You can design with it in mind. But ultimately, like any game, it's not until you test it that you're like, oh, that's what's actually happening. And so this is where you can use this basically like cheat sheet of when you go through, and if you see that the game thread is too high, or the render thread, or the GPU, or the memory is too high, you can kind of use that cheat sheet to give you a starting basis of like, what do I need to cut down? Where can I, how can I reduce this? This is where temperature also comes into play, and CPU usage. Those would be new ones that you'll see on mobile. Um, and let me see. Basically, if CPU usage is too high, and that's going to be things that having to do with like maybe the game thread. Now, CPU usage may be high and game thread may look normal. So these may look normal, and CPU usage is picking up on other things that are going on that's making it, go wildly crazy. Um, if that's too high, it can raise the temperature level. And if the temperature goes too high, basically all of these numbers across the board will continuously go high, and everything slows down. So it's basic like just lag and not goodness, right? So you want to keep these all, low. You want to keep the temperature low, and but yeah, this is basically what it'll look like. So it becomes very relevant and useful.
I have
Um,
a quick question. Do you
mhm.
rely on the colors to know like if it's too high or low in this case, or is there certain numbers you're looking for?
In this case, I do. I would say I'm not really sure about the used memory here. This is the PC version up here. I'm not sure why that's in red. Maybe because because I feel like used memory is new to the profiler anyway. So I'm wondering if that's just that would be considered very high for mobile. So I'm wondering if that's why it's like red. Um, but yeah, but in this case, yeah, the numbers being red here are no good. You should listen to those numbers or those colors.
Cool.
Okay,
Thanks.
so more mobile specific notes. Let's see. Oh, we're doing good on time. Um, Mesh merges. Oh, okay. So basically, they greatly increase memory as a trade for decreasing game thread costs. So mesh merges can be complex and they're not always set up appropriately. Um, and so I've tried running a bunch of tests on them. And basically, I personally avoid mesh merges for anything that's going to be on mobile, except for very specific applications. So in animations, basically, when something's animating, every child transform is being calculated on where it needs to be when, which is just a high game thread cost. Um, and when you put them in an aggressive mesh merge, the only transform that's being calculated is just that mesh merge's transform. So you can go from like, oh, it was calculating, these 100 objects that are rotating. Um, and now it's just one. It's just one calculation. So that's where like Mesh Merge comes to the rescue for animations. Um, Attaching costumes to players. Basically, because that's on a player that's animating, it kind of uses the same principles. You want that to be a single transform instead of uh, it calculating every single object that's attached to the forearm. Um, that would be just a lot more expensive than calculating just the mesh merges transform. Um, and then basically, if you have at least like 20 of the same object with the same material in a screen space, um, that can decrease draw calls, which will help your render thread. Um, it it ends up basically mesh merge if you have and this is again this is very mobile specific. If on PC you're basically not going to see these things or these issues. Um, and so mesh merging on PC just acts very differently. But if you're porting your PC game to mobile, you may run into a lot of issues if you have a lot of mesh merges that aren't set up correctly or just have a whole bunch of them. But yeah, if you're intent on using mesh merges, you want to have basically the same object and the same material. Otherwise, the calculations that it has to do to split them off nulls out with the memory increase. So it makes it like not really worth it. Let's see. So animations, basically they can be CPU heavy. So if it's sometimes even with a mesh merge, they can be CPU heavy. So sometimes it's just like best to stick it in a medium context. So you'll see it on PC, but maybe not on mobile. And sometimes that's okay because, the screens are small. And so as you're running around, it just feels different than everything you would see on PC. Um, so, um, and as a recap, memory is going to be a new bottleneck that you'll have to pay attention to, and its main costs are from the object count of the entire project content and scene. So remember that stuff that's in your project content is also going into memory. So if you're not using it, go ahead and delete it. And then it comes from unique objects, and it can come from just a lot of mesh merges in general. Um, Temperature is another new bottleneck that you'll have to pay attention to, and its main cost is coming from CPU usage, which sometimes CPU usage, like I said, can be a little bit of a mystery, but I've noticed that animations do kind of pull on that, animated meshes are another heavy CPU usage asset. Um, what you see all at once, so your screen space becomes much more relevant on mobile. Um, these optimizations, like everything basically that I've been talking about, is all stuff that if you are into game development, it's all stuff that's generally known and kind of practiced. But that's like basically we've gotten away with a lot because PCs are just so beefy. They can just handle so much more. So when you're working on mobile, all of these practices that you maybe heard of or knew of really come into play now. Now you really have to apply them um, because the devices just they don't have a giant fan attached to them. So, they can overheat and get sad. Um, and designing to inherently cool down, to have like cool down moments for your phone, um, would be ideal. Basically, if there's like let's say you have a central hub area and that's where everyone's kind of spawning in and there's just a lot of stuff going on. Maybe if you have a mini game that you plan on setting up, maybe have that mini game port the player to a less complex section of the map. Maybe the mini game doesn't have to be right in the center of that hub where everyone is. It'll just be the players that, are part of that mini game. And that helps cool down the phone so it's not rendering the whole map, the whole hub, the whole world, while also trying to do this other stuff. And then just generally, like, good luck. This is, it can sometimes feel like an uphill battle when you don't know why something, I mean, and I'm sure you run into this on PC as well, when you don't know why something's running poorly or why, you have to maybe limit the player count. And you wish you could have more players. And it's just like it's hard work, but obviously like when you can get it buttery smooth and like have it, work, it's so worth it. So yeah, so good luck. And any questions?
I do have one actually, but I'll wait for the other people as well. So it was regarding you were cleaning up non-destructive stuff. I think it was your third slide. Does that apply to community content as well? Should you try to avoid that at all costs and kind of just like copy and paste it over?
Um, yes. Yeah, I would say, I mean, I don't know about like avoid at all cost. But yeah, basically, I mean, I would copy it over. And generally with like community content in general, I usually open it in a separate map just to see what all is coming in, right? But that's just to have more control over everything that's going to come in. Um, but yeah, so I would recommend it just so that you have, like I said, more control over what exactly is coming in. And that way, maybe there's just some pieces that you want, but not all pieces. Um, that way you can just bring over those certain pieces and not bring the whole community content over.
Yeah, that makes sense. Denior asks, can you give us personal advice? But it's a little broad, your question. I don't know if you want to clarify what you meant by that. I think that last slide gave a lot of good advice, general advice, but let's see. Okay, there's another question. Is there a method by using reference viewer to spot any quick ways that templates are not being used or placed in the hierarchy? I
Um,
think, did you cover that in that third slide that we were at? The reference viewer for templates?
yeah, here, let me open a project that has a bunch of stuff in project content. So there's basically not a quick way. There's just like literally going asset by asset, right clicking. And so open in reference viewer. I actually just have it here, just because I use it so much. And then it'll just tell you right here. So I basically, we'll just go down one by one. And as I run into anything that doesn't have any references here, then I'll delete it. Again, another way is if you press delete, if it's being used, it'll pop up this note. So you can just say like no, and then press down and try again. And anything that isn't being used anywhere will just automatically delete. So, but unfortunately, there's not a quicker way to do that.
Nightman is asking, for mobile, is there a good and a bad example of using a merge model?
Um, let's see. Basically, in terms of like an example, so like it's like I don't want to dissuade everyone from using merged models. Um, but also, so this has like a lot of different pieces, right? Generally, I feel like it might be someone's inclination to put the whole thing in a merged model. And that unfortunately means that all of these different pieces, anything that's the same will act as one piece, but anything that's different, which this piece definitely has lots of different pieces, will be a separate calculation. Um, and so this, even though normally, like, or maybe even on PC, it works just fine as a merged model, because if you're not, if you're over here and you pop around the corner, it's loading that whole thing just once by itself. Like that would be great on PC, but on mobile that just wouldn't be. And so in this scene, um, I literally I took out all the merged models, but this rotates. And so, and this one, I don't think I've actually done it in this one, but um, let's see, coin spin script. So Manta coin geo. So this whole thing, which is 46 objects, spins. No, thank you. That's like 46 transforms. It's literally, and when I say transforms, it's, these positions. Um, it's going through and it's saying, okay, I'm spinning this one now. Okay, I'm spinning this one now. Okay, I'm spinning this one now. All the way, all 46 of them. And so when you put that in a merged model, and again, merged models can be tricky. And so if this, let me see. So merge model containing these. So if you do an aggressive merge, that'll just ensure that everything in here, oh, that doesn't count, will be part of the merge. But now when you come in, only this transform is going to be calculated because everything else that transform will just, it's not rendering all of these transforms. So I would say that's a good example of like a good use case of like why you would only want one transform, right? And how to get it. I don't know if does that help, Nightmane?
Yeah, so it sounds like if you ever want to transform anything, like a small group of objects, that'd be a great use case. And then you mentioned it breaks detail relevance if you use a merge model, or does it break the merge model if you use detail relevance? I can't remember.
It breaks detail relevance. So if in here I have a new client context and I decide to make this a medium, so this is going to be like a PC only. This detail right here is going to be PC only, and all my mobile players will only see this part. So unfortunately, because of the way merged model works, is when the game opens, it takes everything that's in here and puts it in this transform, right? It's like, okay, I'm a single object now, which means this did not cull out. This is now part of the merged model. So, so it's just something to keep in mind that if you do have something like that, um, you'd probably want to keep it out. And then I believe, yeah, you would just want to keep it out.
Could you have two merge models, one for each detail relevance? Or is that just defeating the purpose?
Oh, what do you mean? Like if you had another, if you like made this into a merged model?
Right.
Yeah, yeah, you could do that. It just kind of depends on how much you're taking out. So if you're only, taking out a few things, then it might not be worth it. Although if the whole thing's spinning, then it typically is. So I guess that would be for PC. So yeah, merged model would be fine because it's not going to render in mobile anyway.
And Lumen had a follow up. Sorry if you can hear something in the background, but he said if you select multiple templates and try to delete them, would that kind of delete anything that didn't have a reference, or if anything had a reference, it would kind of cancel it? Um, that's kind of what I was thinking, but I don't think it would work. So, like in your project content window, if you kind of just like selected everything and tried to delete it, it would probably cancel if anything had a reference, not just delete anything that doesn't have a reference, right?
Yeah, like so it'll still bring up this like pop-up of like, hey, these things have a reference. Um, and then yeah, if anything, basically that's what it'll trying to make sure I understand the question correctly. Um,
Yeah, I think the
if any of
question was
this,
like, what's a quick way to get rid of anything that didn't have a reference? So he was thinking like maybe you could select everything and then try to delete it all, and it would kind of ignore
yeah,
anything.
it won't delete them because even if you have, if you delete multiple things and let's say all of these were not being referenced, it'll still actually bring up a pop-up that'll say, instead of this, it'll say like, do you want to delete these unused assets? So it, at the very least, you can be like, oh, okay, these are all unused, and you can go like, sure, go ahead. Um, so you can do it that way, but if you select a bunch of them that has like a mixed group, it won't like automatically just delete the ones that aren't being used. You'll still have to like sort through them.
All right, and there's another question by AS. Is there a better way to import community content that does not create duplicates in the imported assets at the same community So I think we kind of covered that already. You would just want to like copy the template and paste it over. Because I think there's some extra memory that gets used when you do community content. I might be wrong about that.
Yeah. No, I think so too. And basically because it's going to have it here in imported content, but then if you're using it in your world, then it's also going to be in your templates.
That makes sense. And wait, did we answer the entire question? He says, and would it show up in reference viewer for community content? That's interesting.
Um,
So like would it have a reference if you didn't use it but it was community content?
Let me see. Well, if you didn't use it,
Right.
I'm wondering like, hold on. I mean, I guess we could test it out. So, do. Sure. And so if I'm understanding correctly, if you don't use it, why isn't it in my imported content? Do I have to put it in scene for it to, oh, there it is.
Oh, yep.
Okay. And so if let's see, templates. Why is it not showing up? I'm like, am I missing something here? Huh. I thought it would show up in your templates. Let's make it active.
Yeah, it must just stay in the imported content section, I guess. I'm not sure.
See. Huh. Yeah. So I guess just in general, more to the point is basically bringing in something like this, brought in all of these. I feel like it's not populating them. They have to be in there somewhere. And so ideally you have like a different project that you bring it in, and then you can just say like, hey, the basic assault rifle is really the only one that I really needed. So I'm just going to bring that in, and then you just copy and paste it into your project.
Yeah, so for copying and pasting stuff, you literally just like Control C, right, in the hierarchy, and then you go to the
Yep.
hierarchy of your other. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
Which is,
he mentioned that he once tried that and it broke some of my assets. The meshes did not render once deployed. But it sounds I think you get anything required for an object if you just copy and paste it. Like any scripts that come with it should be copied
you
over.
do, yeah. Um, where is that message, by the way? Who's, oh,
The
there it is,
Academy
there it is.
text. Do you see the channel?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's yeah, as
And the
MIP.
meshes did not render. So that sounds like maybe like I don't want to say unique case, but like a specific case to maybe your map. Maybe something conflicted. But usually when you copy something over, it'll bring over whatever's needed for that thing to work. So it may just be that you had maybe another script in your scene that was nullifying some of the things in there.
And I think there are some issues if you have like scripts with the same name. It could potentially overwrite some of the other scripts.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I think
there's.
it tries to
Oh,
do like a good job of like adding a -1 if there is like, duplicate scripts, but so I don't know that it necessarily overwrites it, but it can, if they're both running, then it can be conflicting in that way.
okay. Bao says it would try to just make a new script with a suffix at the end. Like maybe Core actually takes care of that for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just when they're both running that can cause issues. But yeah, any mobile performance questions? Again, I highly recommend that you keep a copy of the slides. It's just like good referential material. I know you all don't have like, access to like being able to really see things on your phone yet, but that's coming soon. So that's where a lot of this will start very much clicking, and you'll want to go back to this and be like, okay, wait, what do I do when this is too high?
Yeah, no, this is going to be a really great reference to keep in hand, especially when we get more tools to emulate mobile. So I'll definitely be using it. Yeah, thank you so much. Let's see, do we need to worry about making the bandwidth efficient? Is what Barge is asking.
What do you mean by bandwidth?
I am wondering that myself, but how much connection the player has for different types of games.
Oh, like storage?
Maybe it's like internet bandwidth, like if someone is laggier, then I know some people overseas have trouble with some games regarding lag. Or
Oh, I
oh,
see.
like said, oh, I get it. Kind of like using your using Wi-Fi versus like cellular
Yeah.
bandwidth.
I mean, personally, it's like as developers, I don't know how much we can help on our front on that, like if someone has like poor connection. Um,
Yeah, would a like a more performant game be easier to connect for a lower bandwidth, I'm wondering?
it depends on what we mean by like performance. So it's like usually lower bandwidth where that's uh where that's going to have a bigger effect is like in lag. So like let's say you have an obby and objects are moving. Well, you might jump on an object that you thought was there, but is like not really there anymore. Or you may shoot someone and you thought they died, but like, nope, they didn't. Or you actually died a while ago, even though you're still running. And so basically, um, those are things that you're going to run into on PC as well, though. And so just like you'd want to be aware there of like, okay, I guess how to make things more performant in that way. Um, but yeah, it would basically be the same, yeah, as PC.